Give me my card.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll get questions if you don't.
Ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to get started with today's meeting. I'm Mel Linger with L.B. Carlson, one of the co-chairs of this committee with Ken Ryan from Daily Printing. And welcome everybody. We have a really good turnout today, and thanks to Steve setting up Andy. We're looking forward to that discussion. I think there's some new folks online that haven't attended one of these meetings before, so just briefly what we do is we try to get together every other month. That's the game plan. We usually meet in here. If people can attend face-to-face, otherwise the online option is always available too. The group is growing. We'd like to see that. We've been doing this now for about a year, I think. So we welcome that. So every meeting we try to have a key topic that we pick ahead of time, and Ben routes that to everybody to see if it's of interest. And we always like to get feedback from people too that are attending today on ideas or things they might like to see in the future. So if anybody does have a topic that they think would be good for the group, you could route that to myself or Ken or Ben or Steve too, and we'll try to get that on the agenda for a future meeting. I think we do go every other meeting, but Steve, we're skipping December because of the holidays, but we're going to regroup again in January. So we'll get something out on that soon, okay? I'm going to turn it over to Steve to introduce our guest.
Thanks, Mel. So I have the pleasure of knowing Andy Paparozzi and of introducing him today to those who are in attendance at L.B. Carlson. And again, thank you, Mel, for allowing us to be here and supporting us, as well as all those online. And many of them are new to the Financial Executives Council. I think it goes to because people know who Andy is. He has a reputation. I've known Andy for quite some time. He is currently Chief Economist for SGIA. There have been a number of acronyms that have been around Andy's name for a number of years. That's because we've had all these associations that have come and gone, all have needed a level-headed visionary to help understand where we've been and where we're going. And that's been the unifying principle of associations of many of these organizations. And so that's why SGIA, which is a growing organization, knew they needed someone at the helm to really set the stage of where we're going. And Andy has been able to do that, and he does it in a way that is very understandable and relatable. So he's a terrific guy and well representing the industry, and we're happy to have him here. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Andy. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Steve. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your kind words. As you said, we're going to talk this afternoon about the state of our industry, and in particular, I'd like to talk about three topics. Ben, how do I advance the slides, please?
You actually have to tell me to do it.
Okay. All right, next slide, please. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to talk about three things in particular today. The first is key business indicators. What's happening with sales? What's happening with profitability? What's growing? What isn't? And are clients coming back to print? Then I'd like to talk about the economy. What can we expect from the economy? And what will it mean for our industry? And finally, I'd like to talk about what I personally think is the most important topic. What are we going to do about it all? Because knowing what's happening and what's ahead is helpful, but the difference maker is knowing what to do right now to make what's happening and what's ahead an opportunity rather than a threat, because it can be either. So we'll talk about some must-dos, but let's get started with our key business indicators. Next slide, please. SGIA estimates that our industry's total sales, everything we do these days, grew 1.5% during the first half of 2019. That is down from 2% during the 6 months ending March 31st and 2.7% during the 6 months ending December 31st. Our industry has slowed primarily because, as the right-hand graphic shows, the economy has slowed. And as we will discuss shortly, the economy is likely to slow further over the next 15 months, but not collapse into recession. Next slide. We estimate that our industry's total sales now equal, again, everything we do, $87.4 billion. That is still down approximately 11% from the 2007 pre-Great Recession high, but it is up more than 12%, nearly $10 billion from the 2011 low. And as the next slide shows, the composition of our industry's revenues continues to change. The commercial printers we survey at SGIA, your peers, estimate that something other than printing will provide on average 25.6% of their revenue within 2 years, up from 20.2% today and 16.2% 2 years ago. Our next slide shows a sample of the services your peers now offer. Now, many of these services would not have even been considered part of our industry not all that long ago. Now, I did not say they are offering these services profitably. Some are, but a lot aren't. To be frank, a lot succumbed to the hype and got into some things that they really didn't understand. But I show them to you just to illustrate why $1 of our industry's revenue today has a very different composition from $1 2 or 3 years ago, never mind 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. Our next slide shows that the majority of commercial printers we survey, and your peers, are participating in printing industry convergence, which is the melding of segments as printers of all types expand beyond their core services. And I don't think you'll be surprised that among commercial printers, the diversification has been most aggressive into graphic and sign work, wide format work, which nearly 2/3 of the printers, commercial printers we survey now offer. But it's not just graphic and sign work. 1/5 have moved into functional printing, 1/5 into package printing converting, and even 15% have moved into apparel decoration. And this, again, I'm not saying they're doing this profitably. Some of them are, but a lot of them aren't. It's just to reflect and illustrate a reality of our industry, that printers of all types are getting involved in new areas. Boundaries are breaking down. Traditional definitions of who does what, when, how, and for whom are breaking down. And it works both ways. 26% of the graphic and sign producers we survey at SGIA have now also gotten into commercial printing and are deriving, on average, nearly 27% of their revenue from commercial work. And this is why company counts mean absolutely nothing. This is why our industry is getting more competitive despite ongoing consolidation, because new competitors are emerging. Again, boundaries between who does what, how, and for whom are breaking down. Next slide, please. We asked your peers about the overall trend in their major product markets. The majority identify two as growing: point of purchase display advertising and direct mail. And by direct mail, they don't mean bulk, generic, undifferentiated direct mail. They mean highly targeted, personalized, relevant direct mail. On the next slide, we asked your peers to tell us a little more about their interest in graphic and sign work. Because as I said earlier, 2/3 of them have already moved into that segment. So we wanted to know what exactly are you targeting? What products are you offering? And frankly, we were surprised by the range of graphic and sign products our commercial printers are offering. It's not just posters and banners and point of purchase displays. If you look on the left-hand side of this table, they're getting involved in wall architecture and building graphics, vehicle wraps. On the right-hand side, digital displays, backlit signs, dimensional signage. And again, it all speaks to the interest in the commercial market to diversify into the wide format graphic and sign area. Next slide, we asked your peers about the overall growth trend in their primary end markets. And as you can see from the left-hand side, majority is identified, or I should say at least 50% identified 3 end markets as growing: healthcare, architecture, construction, and interior decorators and designers. And substantial majorities identify a broad range of markets from corporate branding, substantial percentages, I should say, excuse me, not majorities, identified a broad range of markets from corporate branding to athletic wear as growing. And I do not know, I know what you're thinking, I don't know exactly what they sell into these markets that's creating the growth. We'll investigate that in our next round of research, but I present these data to show that despite what the woe is meers tell us, a broad, diverse group of commercial printers is finding opportunity in a broad, diverse group of end markets. Next slide, please. Profitability. What it all comes down to. It's nice that you're diversifying. It's nice that you're participating in printing industry convergence. It's nice that you're hooking up with these hot markets, growth markets, high growth potential markets. But the issue is, are you doing any of that profitably? And for many of your peers, for various reasons, the answer is no. For example, 59.5%, this is the 2 bars on the extreme left of the graphic, 59.2% of the commercial printers we surveyed report that their sales grew last year, but just 36.5% report that their profitability grew. They didn't have much success getting growth from the top line to the bottom line, and that's an issue. So we probed, as we always do, and we asked, well, what's in the way? What's stopping you from being more profitable? And as our next slide shows, your peers identified nearly 20 barriers, from labor shortages to rising tariffs to increasing profitability. And each of your peers cited 4 of the barriers on average. And the consensus ran something like this. And again, you can follow along on the left side of this table. The consensus ran something like this. We're growing, but we're just not able to generate enough growth to support margin growth, particularly because of the second barrier, broadly rising increases in costs, healthcare, wages, key inputs and supplies and materials, and severe shortages of production personnel are impacting our bottom line. They are forcing us to hire folks who are not as productive and skilled and efficient as we would like them to be. So we hire them and we train them and we get them up to speed. And then with labor markets at their tightest in 50 years, what happens? They hang around a couple of months and then take off for a few extra bucks, creating all kinds of inefficiencies and costs for us. Our workflow is not as efficient as it should be. Yeah, some of it is because of the disruption created by high turnover, but it's not just that. It's just not where it needs to be. We admit it, and it is affecting our bottom line. And we're running older, slower, less efficient equipment. Why? Because we haven't been able to generate enough profitability to support the kind of capital investment we need to do. And again, this is all good to know, but the bottom line issue is, so what are we going to do about it? And later on, we'll get to the must-dos, the kinds of things that we need to do to build and maintain margins. Next slide, we'll start talking a bit about the economy. That's, I'm sorry, excuse me, I changed the order. This question, are clients coming back to print? I recently asked your peers that because I'm tired of hearing that print is dead. So we recently asked your peers, several hundred of them, all different company sizes, to do something, to rate on a scale from 5 for definitely to 1 for not at all, whether their clients and prospects are moving back to print. That is, are your clients and prospects recognizing print's value in complementing, not replacing, complementing electronic communications? And as you can see, the large majority said somewhat, more than a third said no or not at all, and just 10%, a little over 10% said they are. And that puzzled me, so I asked, well, what's going on? And I don't think you'll be surprised by the response. There are a number of responses, but by far the most frequent response was, well, the media buyers, the designers, they really, especially the younger ones, but overall, they just don't see print as effective anymore. And that puzzled me and it concerned me as someone who's had the privilege of being in this industry for 36 years. So I did some reading. Our next slide, please, Ben. And I came across a number of articles that I hope you've read, and I hope you've shared with your staff, and I hope you've shared with your clients and prospects, and I hope you've shared with anyone who has ever told you that print is, if not dead, not as effective as it used to be. Who has read Why Printed Catalogs Are Still Important in the Age of Amazon? This article, which by the way takes about 3 minutes to read, talks about how Wayfair, now you know Wayfair's story, don't you? You know Wayfair, the the company grew from about $300 million in revenue to $2.25 billion in revenue between its founding in 2002 and 2016. And do you know what Wayfair did on February 29th, 2016? After growing from 381 million in revenue to 2.25 billion in revenue, this company, born of the internet, founded by two electrical engineers, by the way, this company on February 29th, 2016, introduced its first printed catalog. And I'll quote you. This article quotes a number of Wayfair executives. One, this Bob Shewin, who says the catalog offers an incredible opportunity to deliver a rich, tactile shopping experience to our customers. Another Wayfair executive, Erin Moran, said, we think that direct mail is a chance that gives us a valuable, immersive touch point where we can tell our brand stories and enhance the shopping experience of our customers. The catalog was so successful that Wayfair subsequently rolled out additional offline activations like physical pop-ups where a selection of catalog merchandise could be featured to give customers a chance to touch and feel the products available on its e-commerce site. Next slide, please. And the article goes on and on to talk about Greats, the founder of Greats. Again, another company born of the internet, of e-commerce. It sounds kind of counterintuitive that we're finding return on snail mail, but that's how crowded digital has become. Online has become so noisy, it doesn't have the efficacy that it used to. Next slide, please. Amazon releases their first ever printed catalog. Anyone read it yet? This article goes into how Amazon and companies like Amazon, born of e-commerce, are integrating print with electronic communication and moving into interactive and mobile communication. There, and I'm quoting from the article. It'll take you 2 minutes to read. There are no prices in the catalog. Readers are invited to scan the images in the pages using their smartphone and be taken directly to the corresponding page on Amazon. Next slide, please. The fact that multi-billion-dollar companies such as Amazon and eBay, which also introduced its first printed catalog, are turning to physical catalogs to advertise their products is a big deal. Companies like these don't make key marketing decisions unless there's a very large benefit to it. Next slide. Not surprisingly, Amazon's toy catalog is all about data. Another article everyone in our industry should be reading. And it talks about how Amazon uses, again, interactive and mobile communication with the printed catalog. How Amazon has integrated mobile and interactive technology into an ink and paper on experience. And next slide, please. The point of all this is that Amazon, Wayfair, eBay, Greats, all these companies, Google these articles, you'll find dozens like them, and they make a very strong case for our industry. But what they do is talk about how companies are using print in a new way, not abandoning print, but using it in a new way. Personalized communication. Amazon, Wayfair, eBay, Greats know a whole lot about their customers, and they are using those massive databases to personalize their printed communication, integrated communication. These are the three defining trends in communication: personalization, integration of print and electronic, a cross-media approach, and interactive mobile. All of them are embedding augmented reality markers in print that, when read by a smartphone, link to related online videos, content, graphics, offers, and other resources. print as a complement to electronic alternative. And what these companies know that too many don't is that communication is not mutually exclusive. Communication is mutually reinforcing. We don't communicate this way or that way. We communicate this way and that way. And the next time you hear someone say that print is less relevant, tell them Amazon, Wayfair, Ebates, Greats, and the like don't think so. So it takes you 30 seconds to download these articles, 2 minutes to read them, half an hour to put together a couple of talking points that you can share with clients and prospects and anyone else, again, who needs to be convinced of the value of what we do in communication. All right, now we'll talk about the economy. And as I mentioned earlier, our first slide, our industry has slowed. Well, let's speak frankly. Our industry has slowed primarily because the economy has slowed. Now, it wasn't always like that. As this graphic shows, the economy accelerated rapidly through 2017 and into 2018. In fact, you see that kind of middle bar, the tallest bar there? During the 6 months ending September 30th, 2018, a little over a year ago, the economy grew by 3.2%, the fastest growth over any 6 months in 4 years. So what happened? Well, as our next slide shows, international economic brinksmanship happened. You may call it the trade wars or trade disputes. I call it international economic brinksmanship because that's what it is. In January 2018, January 22nd to be precise, we targeted solar panels, washing machines, steel and aluminum. China then targeted our sorghum, aluminum, waste, pork, fruits, nuts. The European Union, our cranberries, bourbon, Harley Davidsons, and jeans. Canada, our steel, aluminum, agriculture, and food products. The tit for tat went on, and over the next 18 months, more capital goods, more raw materials, more intermediate goods were added to the hit list, along with finished goods from luggage to yachts. Tariff hikes were announced. Some were enforced and some were delayed. Exemptions were granted. Some were honored, some were rescinded, and some replaced by imports. Who knew what was next? I mean, how do you operate an international business like this? And the next slide shows that this disruption and uncertainty had a profound effect on the economy. Capital investment took a hit. Capital investment, now again, these slides right next to the economy one. Look how capital investment accelerated through 2017 and into 2018, peaking at 6.6% in mid-2018. Capital investment got a huge boost from an accelerating economy, streamlined regulation, and rising business confidence. But then the uncertainty kicked in. And companies began to trim their CapEx expenses because one of my products or one of my key materials might be next on that hit list. And capital investment responded exactly as you would expect it to respond. From growing by 6.6% in mid-2018, growth slowed progressively to just 1.5% during the first half of 2019. Our next slide shows it didn't end there. Corporate profits took a hit. Profits rose rapidly following the after-tax profits did anyway, following passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Creation Act. But the brinksmanship and uncertainty it created and the disruption it created hindered international markets that are essential to major American corporations. Did you know that the S&P 500 generate approximately 43% of their revenue from overseas? And as the disruption to these critical international markets grew, growth slowed across the globe. And I'm going to read you some numbers. These are from the International Monetary Fund. So I'm not making them up. Since 2017, GDP growth has slowed from 2.7 to 1.6% in the European Union, from 3.1 to 1.5% in Canada, from 2.1 to 1.6% in Mexico, and 1.9 to 1.0% in Japan. And as you might expect, as our major trade partners slowed, American exports declined for the first time in 3 years, while the costs imposed by the brinksmanship continued to rise. So by the end of the first half, corporate profits, which had risen 9.3% during a year earlier, had declined by 0.1%, a dramatic change. Our next slide. The slowdown has not been more severe because, as you've heard, I'm sure, many times in the news, the consumer is still very strong. The tight labor markets that are causing so much problems with hiring and retaining skilled personnel, they have a positive side, as pretty much everything in economics does. There's a positive and a negative, and the issue is, does the positive outweigh the negative, or does the negative outweigh the positive? Those tight labor markets have supported continued substantial increases in incomes. And again, the graph I prepared shows that in the second quarter of 2019, the most recent for which data are available, wages and salaries increased 5.4%. 3 years earlier, they were only growing at 2.6%. So this healthy growth, accelerating growth in compensation has supported healthy consumer spending, and consumer spending is approximately 30% of GDP. But the problem is, if the brinksmanship continues to dampen profitability, at some point, eventually employment and income and the consumer are going to slow. Next slide, please. So what does it all come down to? Until the brinksmanship ends, and don't think for a minute that phase one agreement we reached with China last Friday means it's over. Further slowing is likely. The consensus of economists surveyed quarterly by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia expects the economy's growth to slow from 2.9% last year to 2.2% this year and 1.8% next year. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, 2%, 3%, I mean, who cares? What's the difference? And for $1 million or a $10 million or a $100 million company, there isn't much difference. But for the $19 trillion American economy, now listen to this. For the $19 trillion American economy, there's a big difference between 2% growth and 3% growth. Growth of 1.8%, which we're expecting next year, reduces GDP by approximately $210 billion from what it would have been had growth continued at last year's 2.9% pace. Now let's put that number in perspective. Last year, textile and apparel manufacturers who make all the clothes we wear only had sales of $70 billion. Beverage manufacturers, a big industry that makes everything we drink, had sales of only $105 billion, and all these TV and radio broadcasters only had sales of $169 billion. So that slowdown that is going to cost us $210 billion in GDP from what it would have been had growth continued at 3% is the equivalent of losing a major industry or two. So that's why it matters. Next slide, please. Further slowdown is likely for the reasons I indicated. However, recession is not, at least not over the next 15 months. And if you take nothing else away from this presentation, remember that this idea that we're somehow due for a recession is utter nonsense. We are never due for a recession. Economic expansions do not die of old age. They die for one of or a combination of three reasons. Number one, some kind of excess is allowed to develop in the economy, such as the real estate bubble prior to the Great Recession of 2007, 2009. Or the dot-com bubble, you remember that one? Prior to the recession of 2001. Or somebody makes a policy error. The Fed tightens monetary policy too quickly and too extensively. Poorly designed, timed, and executed tax increases. Innovation stifling regulation. Or there's some kind of exogenous shock to the economy, such as, and most of you, I do, but most of you probably don't, remember the OPEC oil embargoes of the 70s. That's what causes a recession. And currently, there is no evidence of excess severe enough to cause recession. The excess that may cause the next recession is corporate debt. And I didn't include it in this presentation, but I have a frightening chart that shows the rise in corporate debt over the last 10 years. But that's not likely to be a problem until interest rates rise a lot more and the Fed starts tightening credit. And right now, the Fed has absolutely no reason in the world to tighten credit. Washington, in terms of economic policy, isn't doing much of anything. Sometimes that's not a bad thing. And the increasingly diverse, adaptable American economy is not as susceptible to exogenous shocks as it once was. And there's one other thing that suggests we're going to slow further, but not collapse into recession. Our next slide shows the trend in housing starts. Now, did you know that housing starts, I know you hear a lot about the inverted yield curve and all of that, but did you know that housing starts are one of the most reliable indicators, leading indicators of recession, having declined during the 12 months prior to every recession since 1960? Now, that is not to say they are going to decline prior to the next recession. No economic indicator is perfect, and no two recessions are identical. But the recent rebound in housing starts, and they were declining, the recent rebound in housing starts is very encouraging. Our next slide, please. And again, another indication that slowdown, yes, meaningful slowdown, but not recession. So where does this all leave us? Well, hopefully, that phase one agreement reached last Friday does lead to a more comprehensive phase two agreement. But there's absolutely no guarantee of that. I mean, you saw what happened Friday when the agreement was announced. The Dow went up about 534 points, and then as the market players started to digest what it really meant, it lost about 200, it didn't lose, it ended up 300 somewhat points for the day, but they weren't nearly as enthusiastic about it. It's just what the name suggests. It's a first step. Hopefully, it leads to a meaningful agreement. Hopefully, the USMCA is ratified. Hopefully, the brinksmanship ends, and hopefully, the global economy heals rapidly from the destruction and uncertainty it has created. But with brinksmanship, no one ever knows. I describe it as a slippery slope that leads to a trap door. Slide through that door, and the outcome is something such as global economic recession, no one intended and from which no one benefits. So that's where we are with the economy. And as I said, that's all good to know. It's nice to know what's happening, why it's happening, and what's likely ahead. But the difference maker is what we're going to do about it right now. And I'm going to start to talk about that very briefly, starting with our next slide. And I titled this slide, "We're going to do a lot more than hope." We're not going to sit around and hope all the things I had on the previous slide happen. I mean, that's no strategy. We're going to talk about, and I have prepared 20 of these. We're not going to go through all of them. I'm going to pick 2 or 3 just to give you a flavor of what they're about. But when I do my surveys and I hear your peers talk about what's stopping them from being more profitable, I then do a literature search. I go into the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, McKinsey, the most reliable sources, the proven business bestsellers, and I try to find a solution to that obstacle. And over the years, I've generated 74 of them. Proven, tested ways to make what's happening and what's ahead our opportunity and somebody else's threat, to build and maintain margins in our increasingly competitive, complex industry. I call them must-dos because that's what they are. They're not things that would be nice to do if we get around to them, which we never do. They are essential if we are going to build and maintain margins in our increasingly competitive, complex industry. And these must-dos cover all the essentials, such as hearing the voice of the customer, acting on what the customer tells us. I mean, what's the point of doing customer surveys and focus groups and all of that stuff if we're not going to act on what we hear? Picking our shots. What really is an opportunity for my company? Oh, sure, it's creating a lot of buzz. And sure, some folks seem to be doing well with it, but is it really an opportunity given my company's resources, circumstances, and capabilities? And I mentioned earlier, I have seen more companies in our industry struggle and more than a few fail, not because of a lack of opportunity, not because print is dying or dead or any of that other nonsense, BS, but because they went into things, they succumbed to the hype. They went into markets and products and activities they did not fully understand. Strategy. How do we put together an effective strategy? Even more important, how do we execute the strategy? When I ask your peers why they miss opportunities, and every company does, when I ask your peers why they miss opportunities, do you know what the overwhelmingly number one response is? Not that we didn't identify the opportunity, not that we didn't put together a plan for capturing the opportunity. The number one response is we didn't execute the plan. We had a plan, but we didn't execute it. We lost it. Set and forget. We got tied up in the everyday demands of running our business, perfectly understandable, and the opportunity passed us by. So I put together must-dos on executing effectively, and of course on labor force development. No company, no industry prospers unless it can recruit, retain, and develop the labor, personnel, and skills that it needs. And I wanna wrap up. I know we're running a little long. I included 20 of these must-dos in this presentation. Obviously, we're not going to cover them all, and that's okay, because if we can go to our next slide, please. What I've done is provided a summary. I've prepared a summary of the must-do, and I've also, if you look at the top under the title, I've also cited at least one original source in case you want to read more about it. And let me just do one or two, 5 more minutes to give you a flavor of what this is all about. And again, they cover those critical areas I talked about. The first one, as an example, is are your clients completely satisfied, or are they just satisfied? And this is from a Harvard Business Review classic by Thomas Jones and W. Earl Sasser, Why Satisfied Customers Defect. You can download it right at hbr.org. Spend an hour with it. It will change the way you think about measuring customer satisfaction and maximizing customer retention. And just very quickly, the idea is this. We just did a customer survey, as we all do, and we're pretty happy with the results. 27.3% of our customers rated us a 5 out of 5, and another 53.8% rated us a 4 out of 5. So 81% gave us a 4 or 5. We're pretty happy. And the whole point of Jones and Sasser's article is we shouldn't be. We should be concerned. 81% of our customers rated us 4 or 5 out of 5. And we should be concerned about that? And the point of the article is, yeah, we should be concerned because only 27% rated us a 5. Only 20% are completely satisfied. And Jones and Sasser go on to argue very compellingly that there is a huge difference in loyalty. And so retention and profitability between clients who are completely satisfied and those who are just satisfied. And as you can see on the inset on the right in blue, what they go on to show in the article is that increased customer retention can increasing customer retention by even 5% can increase profitability by 25 to 95%. In our next slide, they talk about a number of things in the articles we need to do to move people, our clients, to that number 5, to that completely satisfied status. And they talk about never assuming our relationship with a client is strong, if anything, less than completely satisfied. And this one is very important, I thought, because, a lot of times we do customer surveys where we ask how we compare to the alternative, the competition. And we're pretty happy when it comes back and it says we compare favorably to the competition. Well, Jones and Sasser warn, even if our customer satisfaction scores compare favorably to the competition's, they aren't good enough unless our best clients are 5 out of 5, totally satisfied. Anything less, and they are up for grabs. Therefore, it is almost always worthwhile to try to move the 4s to the 5s than it is to fool around with the 3, 2s, and 1s. And then they go on to argue very compellingly that completely satisfying customers does not mean we never make a mistake with them. We're going to make mistakes. It means we have an effective procedure for making things right when we do. And they talk about case studies where a mistake was made. It was made right for the customer efficiently and quickly, and the customer satisfaction, of course, increased dramatically. So again, why satisfied customers defect? Download it. I'm not going to tell you to spend 5 minutes. Spend an hour with it. It will change the way you think about client satisfaction and client retention. Next slide. And we're going to move through these quickly now, Ben. I just want to highlight something. We all do customer surveys. Has anyone ever asked a customer, what are we doing that annoys you? Well, we should, according to the Customer Service Strategy with the Best ROI by Adrian Swisco. Download it right at Forbes. And he talks about what Jones and Sasser talk about. He talks about it in terms of fives, the difference between a 5 rating and a 4 rating. And his point is, stuff happens. And it's minor in the sense that the client is not going to go trash you on the internet after it happens. Swiss Code talks about how the client in all likelihood is not even going to mention it, but they remember it. And his point is they remember it, and the next time that competitor comes around, they're listening. And that's the difference between the 4 and the 5. The 2 articles fit together very, very nicely. Next slide. Slide after that. You can read that one. I mentioned earlier that one of the biggest problems I see in the industry that has just terribly damaged so many good, viable, long-standing members of our industry is succumbing to the hype. We keep hearing we've got to be doing this, that, and the next thing, and yeah, okay, I could find you a case study that says it's working like mad for this one or that one, but does that mean it's going to work for you? And the issue is, how do I determine whether an option is really an opportunity, whether an option is an opportunity given my company's specific resources, capabilities, and goals? And I found in 2 articles an analytic way to go about evaluating our options and really determining whether they're an opportunity for us. Not for somebody else, but for us, given our specific resources. And again, you can read through it. It's called the Opportunity Evaluation Matrix, a framework for evaluating market opportunity. And let's skip through the next few, Ben, please. The next few explain this. Yep, keep going. One more. One more. There it is. It's a matrix. You evaluate these opportunities. Keep going. One more. Good, good. And I'm going to finish with this one. There are 17 more that follow this one. This one comes from an interview I heard with Peter Drucker. And it was toward the end of his career, and actually the end of his life. He died probably about 6 months later. And during this interview, he was asked, Professor Drucker, in your 60 years of consulting with iconic businesses, what is the one thing you found that business executives, business leaders never learn? In your 60 years of consulting with iconic businesses, what is the one thing you have found that their leaders never learned? And that's exactly how Drucker answered. He said, in business, they never learned over 60 years that in business, one does not begin with answers. One begins by asking, what are our questions? And we'll wrap up with this next slide, ladies and gentlemen. In the spirit of Drucker, in our increasingly competitive, complex industry, we are either getting better or we are falling behind. That wasn't always the case. When I first got in the industry, we grew with the market. There was plenty of opportunity, and you make a mistake with a piece of equipment, you throw a tarp over it and move on with life. And although our gamut of opportunity has expanded, our margin for error has shrunk. And there is no third option in our industry anymore. We're either getting better, we're identifying opportunities, and we're executing and capturing them, or we're falling behind. So, in the spirit of Drucker, we should regularly be asking these questions. What are we doing better today than we were 6 months ago? And do you know, when I ask your peers this, do you know what the number one response is? You know what the number one response is? When I ask them, what are you doing better today? Anything, it could be from any part of your business. What are we doing better today than we were 6 months ago? You know what the number one response is? I don't know. You know what the number two response is, which is even worse than the number one response? The number two response is, I don't have time to even think about it. We're spending so much time doing things that are not building the bottom line. I don't have time to think about what I need to do to build the bottom line. What are we doing better today than we were 6 months ago? What will we be doing better in 6 months than we are today? Because again, we're either getting better or we're falling behind. How are we creating more value for our clients? What are we doing? And most important, well, not most important, equally important, what are we doing to ensure our clients recognize the value we are creating for them? One of the must-dos that follows in the presentation, I title Monetizing Our Contributions to the Client's Success. Because it's not enough simply to identify the client's problem. It's not enough to simply identify the client's pain point. It's not even enough to solve the problem or to relieve the pain. We have to understand, we have to solve, but we also have to document. How much time did we save the client? How much money? How much did we increase the return to their most recent direct mail campaign? How much did we increase traffic to their website? The more precisely we can monetize our contribution to the client's success, the better. And I presented this at a conference not long ago, and one of the other gentlemen on the panel said, well, clients already know that. With something this critical, we don't assume, we verify and we reinforce, and then we verify and reinforce again. You'll see it later in the slide deck. Monetizing our contributions to the client's success, showing them exactly how they benefit from doing business with us. Always important, always, but particularly when we're heading into a slowdown. Because what happens in a slowdown? What's the first thing anyone thinks? Where can I cut? And the point of monetizing our contributions to the client's success is to show them you'd be making a big mistake by cutting us, because here's how you benefited from our partnership. So anyway, there's 17 more of these wonderful things following in the slide deck. Take a look. Pick out one or two that is most relevant to your company. Read the summary I've presented, and then take a look at some of the sources. I have read every one of them. I would never ask you to read something I haven't read thoroughly. And if you have any questions on the must-dos or anything else we covered, please let me know. I'm pretty easy to find. My email and phone number is on the very last slide. And I thank you so much for your time and attention. Steve, thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Are we muted, Ben?
We're not.
Andy, thank you so much. And that was, I thought, terrific. Any initial questions from the group here? Or Ben, do you have any questions chatted in online?
Nothing online right now.
Any questions from the audience? Tom?
Just one, Steve. Andy, are you going to make the deck available to us?
Yeah. So Andy, I have turned it into a PDF, and I supplied it to Ben. We haven't sent it out to the team as yet. Are we then approved to send this out to everyone?
Absolutely. Get that out. And if you folks have any questions at all, you know, we covered a lot. There's a lot more in the slide deck. Any questions at all, give me a call.
Andy, I just have one. Just one question related to, you talked about at one point that aging equipment was causing problems in related to profitability and performance.
Right.
Have you seen any particular correlation to new equipment purchases? Have you done any studies related to those companies that are making that investment, are finding increased profitability? And if so, what type of equipment are you seeing that is included?
Well, we have, in our general study of profitability, we talk to folks about a lot of things, all the elements that go into creating healthy margins. And new equipment that is faster and more efficient is one of the elements. It's not a guarantee. It's what we call necessary but not sufficient. It's necessary, an important piece of healthy margins, but equipment alone just can't guarantee it. But the companies that we find are consistently profitable consistently invest in equipment that does a number of things, that increases speed, increases efficiency, improves workflow, minimizes steps, minimizes touches, and does one other thing. I can't tell you how many of these companies I've interviewed and studied that talk about the wow power, the extraordinary visual, stunningly visual kind of printing that we can produce now, that new technologies, both in finishing and the press department, allow us to produce. The wow power. And that's really the kind of equipment every company we survey and study that consistently maintains profitability invests significantly in equipment, whether software or hardware, whether a management information system that allows them to make better decisions, be faster, be more efficient, minimize steps, and again, creates that wow power, and also that allows them to have a better understanding of what's happening in their business. They talk a lot about how they are able to better capture real-time data on what's happening in production and elsewhere in their business, so they can make more informed, quicker decisions. And if something's going wrong, they know it early and they can correct it early. So yes, it's absolutely essential to maintaining margins. Equipment that will do those kinds of things for us. And you know, I don't know what the answer is for companies that are in a position where they just can't afford to do the kind of capital investment that they need to. It's you know, it's sort of a vicious cycle where you can't generate the margins to invest the way you need to maximize speed and wow power and efficiency and knowledge of what's happening in your business. And it just gets worse and worse. I mean, it ends up being a vicious cycle. And it's absolutely where you don't want to be. I don't have answers for those kinds of companies. Sometimes they're just too far down the slope. But the point is, there's plenty we can do before we ever get to that point. And, absolutely prudent capital investment. And I emphasize prudence, Steve, because I see so many companies, again, just follow the crowd into a hot new technology or a hot new market or a hot new product that, again, really is just not a fit for them.
Okay.
Hopefully,
Well, Amy, thank you. I thought the best news of the day was 15 months, in your opinion, no recession on the horizon. So I'm going to take that as bank, and we won't hold you to it, but we'll hope it's true.
well, it's I just don't see, for the reasons I indicated. I try to indicate what causes a recession, and we're not seeing that now. I mean, I know how fashionable it is to talk about recession, but again, next time you hear somebody tell you that there's going to be a recession, quote them those 3 reasons and tell them about housing starts. And I think you'll be able to convince them. But anyway, thanks again for having me. And any questions at all, give me a call.
All right, let's give Andy a round of applause. Thanks, Andy.
Thank
We'll see
you.
again.
Certainly. You too.
I was gonna ask the same question Tom asked, so how do we get this?
Well, I've already sent the PDF to Ben. He's going to forward it to everyone's email, and then we'll post it.
Put it on
to the
the-
next group.
On the PIM.
Yep, the connect group for the Executives Council.
Cool. Okay, great.
So any takeaways from anybody in that presentation? Things that made a difference to you in any way?
I thought it was great. I took more notes than I expected. And it's good to hear we can get that back. One question I don't know if you guys picked up on it, that one slide that showed, I think it said, companies with 56% of these companies had sales growth, but only like 30-some% had
Increased profitability.
And, why do you think that is? I mean, I'm just kind of curious about that, and I probably should have asked Andy, but, anybody have any thoughts on that? Because we're all trying to grow, right? But if we're not increasing profitability.
Well,
It's cost,
Yeah.
wages.
healthcare. That is our biggest one right now is healthcare. We experienced a great big bump in ours. And it's funny because I was talking, I went out to eat before a hockey game down at the XL, and this restaurant had a line item on their bill, healthcare reimbursement. And I asked him, I said, why do you put it there? He goes, we're trying to be transparent to the point where you understand that this is part of our cost. And so I was talking with the gal at work about it, and she goes, that's just stupid. And then I said, well, we've got the increased healthcare costs. We just do it, we pass along with our price of operating. So you gotta bring that up. And the way that they're doing it, it becomes a non-taxable event. And that's what he said, is the server said that it's not taxable to you, whereas our food is. So they could have gone in and increased the price of their meal by $1 or $2, and I wouldn't have thought anything about it. And so that's how I wrapped it around my head, is to understand that, yeah, it's a cost that goes in. And to your point, is our costs are increasing, and with the competition in the Twin Cities here, the price is usually pretty well established. And so you've got to figure out how to reduce those costs underneath to meet. So that's the challenge.
A la carte and itemized, it's like a hotel bill.
Yeah.
Wow, I thought we started out at 129.
Yeah. So that's,
I think Bjorn, did you have something?
I was just gonna say,
part of me looks at that statistic and thinks it's not necessarily a bad thing, because with some of the reinventing that's taking place in our industry, oftentimes you hire people or buy equipment and there's a lag before you're getting the value from that. I know we've seen that, where even if your sales are growing, you're making some pretty significant investments that'll take time, whether it's equipment, processes, whatever it is, that you're thinking more long-term than boom, 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 you know, everything happening at the same time. But I would also echo the cost side of things, you know.
That is, it's just that slide just kind of got my attention, and we all kind of seen that and know that, and I think it is managing the cost. Part of it, I think, maybe what you're referring to is people that, you know, there's a lot of acquisition growth now as opposed to organic growth. People are buying, and that's probably what you see too, is people invest in a company or invest in a new piece of equipment, and it takes a while before the profits come, right?
Yeah.
At transactional cost.
You're financing it, your interest expense is higher on the front end as opposed to the back end, so you're adding more costs as you acquire that equipment. Another one too is I believe the wages are going up. We're seeing a lot of people in the industry, you know, kind of cannibalizing our players, and you know, for the most part, it seems like it's, you know, industry-wide, is you're trying to get the A players in and get them out there, and sometimes you have to go in and take them from another one and pay for it.
You mentioned that, pay increases were 5% or something like that, but they have stayed steady while the profits have gone down.
Correct.
It's really good, Steve, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was a big get for us.
Yeah, that was awesome. Some good information.
There was, he could have kept talking all day. But it's all pertinent to what we're doing, though. That is the thing. The one that I maybe I'll email them. The one that's kind of got me is it's neat to see the housing starts, but I'd like to know further what the composition of them are. For me, as I drive around town, you see all these great big high rises going up, but what are they for? A lot of them are for retirees, senior living. I drive by one when I go into St. Paul down on West 7th and 35E. It's huge. It used to be an old school. And finally I was out with my dad and said, what happened? What is that going to be? He goes, oh, it's a senior high-rise. And this thing's massive. And you look right out there, that access, I mean, that's all brand new in the last year. You know, all this stuff. So what is the composition of it? And my concern is, what's going to be the composition when the baby boomers start dying? And I don't think the millennials will want to move into a senior high-rise complex. So are those going to come down then, or and that's going to spur the next round of housing starts? It's just interesting.
As long as everybody's sitting here, just ask the question real quick in case anybody has something on the top of their mind for future topics. Anybody have anything they want to bring up now that we should get on the agenda?
And anyone online too, if you want to respond to that question.
Well, if not, that's okay. I mean, we still got a running list, and I think, Ben, you'll probably start planning for the next one, which is going to be in January. Sometime probably, I don't know, after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, sometime in November. Try to get the topic out there to try to gauge interest.
Maybe before Thanksgiving, because that's later.
Oh, it is late this year.
So maybe mid-November, Ben. We'll start working on that.
Sounds good.
So,
One topic, I mean, maybe this is already on the list, but healthcare is a significant expense, and I'm sure we all have different strategies and ways of trying to manage that the best that we can. It would be an interesting potential topic.
We have breakfast coming up on October 30th that we're going to be unveiling the plans for the Minnesota-based UHC program that PIM is now partnering with United Healthcare. So that'll be a 1/1/20 start for that program. The plans are going to be released to us in the next few days. We'll be releasing them to everybody for the first time on the 30th.
Cool.
So people will start to get a sense of what those plans are gonna be, and hopefully they'll be something that people find advantageous better than what they currently have, but, we'll see.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks for hosting.
Thank you. Thanks for allowing us.